All right, hello and welcome to the OCD and Anxiety Show. My name is Matt Cotty and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. And so on this episode, we are going to be talking about having intrusive thoughts about animals or hurting, animals or family pets, stuff like that, which again are intrusive. So it's something that you don't want to do. And so for those of you that are just joining the show or new to the channel, please help us out by subscribing and liking and leaving a review or comment below. And so on this episode, I want to dive in. This continues our series on this idea of intrusive thoughts. So again, if you've been following along the series, this is going to sound a little repetitive, and that's okay, right? Because sometimes when we're able to hear about other forms of intrusive thoughts that we don't struggle with, we can start to see them more objectively and how they work in someone else's situation, which then helps us in our own situation. And so when it comes to intrusive thoughts, right, the first thing that we want to, really distinguish is the idea that you are not your thoughts, right? You're the one who observes them, right? That cognitive diffusion, okay? And with that said, when it comes to these intrusive, violent thoughts or harmful thoughts, right? We talked about in the last episode, we talked about harmful thoughts towards our loved ones. We talked about harmful thoughts towards ourselves. And now we're talking about, towards animals, right? Because this is a very, very common thing that happens, especially with like family pets or animals that you love. It's not uncommon for the OCD and anxiety to attack those things. And so the first thing that we want to talk about is the idea that these thoughts are ego-dystonic. Now, what does that mean? Well, when we're talking about intrusive thoughts, the idea that they're intrusive means that they are invading your mind unwillingly, right? That you don't want these thoughts, right? Well, then the question is, well, who doesn't want them, right? Like you're experiencing them. Who's reacting to them negatively, right? Well, and that's that idea of the cognitive diffusion, right? These thoughts aren't reflective of you. Okay, so there's this higher level of self that actually knows that these thoughts aren't reflective of who I am and what I want. But oftentimes the presence of these thoughts are so disturbing for people, right? That they think that because they thought this, that this must mean, X, Y, or Z, right? Like they attach this story and, beliefs around these thoughts. And that's really what people are reacting to. So to share a kind of a story, one time I was working with this person and they had these intrusive thoughts related to their family dog, right? That they were going to randomly grab a sharp object and literally harm the dog, right? Kill the dog. And these thoughts were so disturbing to the person that the person would literally avoid the kitchen, avoid any objects, and avoid even petting the dog, right? Because the fear was that what if I just snapped and did something, And if this is something you can relate to, because this doesn't just apply to animals, it can apply to anyone, right? It could be children, it could be your loved ones, it could be your coworkers, right? Like these kind of thoughts of what if I just lose control and do something that's totally against my nature, totally against my desires. And what the person did was they ended up kind of constructing this life to avoid causing their animal harm or the dog harm. So part of the recovery process is this, the first part is really understanding that, like I said, that you are not your thoughts and diffusing from that voice in your mind. Now, if you haven't, participated in the Taking Back Control program over at Restored Minds, that's definitely a good first place to start because we really talk about the tools and the skill sets you need to do in order to really practice and grow that space between you and your mind. But the next step was really about identifying all the safety behaviors or compulsive rituals, like whatever you want to call them, because they're interchangeable, and really starting to eliminate those. Because what we got to understand is that there's this confirmation bias that takes place in the mind. So if you, let's say, have an intrusive thought about your pet, right, whatever it is, or, the neighbor's animal, or, fill in the blank. And let's say that you have this intrusive thought and you're sitting on the couch and then every time you look at the animal, you get this thought that pops up in your mind, right? Because it's a thought that you don't want because it's ego-dystonic. So the very presence of your pet actually triggers these thoughts. So you might avoid being in the same room as your pet. Well, the thing is that your mind puts that together. right? And there's this confirmation that bias that takes place. Like, because I avoided my pet, I didn't hurt my pet, and therefore, I kept my pet safe. And then the next time that you're in the same room with your dog or cat or whatever, then your mind produces the thought again, and then you want to avoid again, and then you confirm that you kept the animal safe by avoiding them, right? By not touching them, by being in a different room than them, or keeping them outside, or whatever it is. Okay. The point I want to make here is that any behavior you do that reinforces the idea that that thought was actually true, or actually a danger, or actually a threat, confirms it in your mind, even though it's not true, right? Even though the reality is because it's ego-dystonic, because you don't want to do it, like, you're the least likely person to ever do something like that, right? And that's what's so paradoxical about OCD and intrusive thoughts is the intrusive thoughts that the person experiences they're usually the least likely people to ever act on those kind of thoughts. That's why they cause them so much distress. If you really were a threat to your animal, that the thought of it wouldn't actually cause you any distress. Okay. And so when it comes to, so what we had to do is we had to start eliminating the behaviors that the person was doing around their pet. So in which case, if they avoided the room, it's like, no, I need you to be in the same room. And I actually want the dog to sit next to you. And the anxiety will spike up, right? This is what exposure is. The anxiety is going to rise. It's going to spike up in the body. And what we're doing is we're proving to our brain that we're not really a threat. And by doing no behaviors, the brain's going to produce these thoughts, these feelings are going to start up. But by not engaging the behaviors, by using ERP, what happened is that the brain starts to learn, like, oh, this is a false alarm. Like, I'm not really a threat. And it actually eventually stops producing the thoughts. But we're not trying to stop the thoughts. We're trying to stop the behaviors that are reinforcing the thoughts and reinforcing the anxiety. Does that make sense? It's so important that we understand that, because when you understand that, then it's you target what you try to change completely differently. And ultimately, we obviously incorporate things like acceptance commitment therapy too, and mindfulness on top of the ERP in the AAA response to make sure we're not doing any mental compulsions, right? Because this is the one thing that gets people stuck, is that they usually can spot their physical compulsions really well, their physical safety behaviors like avoidance or checking or, getting reassurance. But what people have a hard time sometimes figuring out or identifying are all the mental behaviors they do. So mentally reassuring themselves, mentally checking to see if they're having thoughts, reassuring, right, or analyzing or trying to solve, right, trying to prove to yourself that I'm not really dangerous or that I really love my, so my pet, fill in the blank. And by doing all these mental behaviors, that actually serves the same way as doing a physical one. So with that said, when you're having these intrusive thoughts, especially if they're related to animals, it's important that, we start to, really dissect what the real problem is. Again, it's not the content of the thought. People that have these intrusive thoughts, they don't ever act violently, right? They're not violent people. They don't harm animals, right? There's a very different situation between people who actually harm animals and people that have intrusive thoughts about harming animals. And I want to be very clear, in this particular episode, we're talking about the latter, right? People that are having intrusive thoughts, right? And people that actually cause harm to people or animals, they don't find the thoughts intrusive. They find the thoughts that they align with them, right? And the reason that the thoughts cause so much distress is because there's no alignment with who you know yourself to be and the thoughts that are popping in your mind. So hopefully that makes sense. And so, but like I said, with intrusive thoughts, the goal is not to eliminate the thoughts or the feelings, but what we're doing is we're targeting the behaviors that are causing that loop to manifest. And it's so important that not only are we looking at the physical behaviors, but all the mental behaviors too. And so, if you're dealing with this, one of the things I want to suggest is that the great first step would be to, head over to restoredminds.com, and we have a free training there that you can, access. And we go into this more in depth with really what this loop is, and especially a lot of the mental behaviors that you may be engaging in. So that would be a great first place to look. We also have some additional resources over there. And so, I hope you found this episode helpful if this is something you're dealing with, and really starting to shift your focus of where you need to put your attention and what you need to to start addressing and changing. And, with that said, we're going to continue on this series, and we're going to be talking about some different intrusive thoughts in this series. So, be sure to stay tuned. And also, again, please support us by liking and subscribing, and even sharing this on your platforms or with your friends that struggle with OCD and anxiety. So, again, my name is Matt. Thanks so much for hanging out today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Take care. Thank you so much for watching that video. And so if you're struggling with OCD and anxiety, I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training for you over at Restored Minds, where you can start learning how to use our AAA response to really break out of that loop and ultimately take back control of your life. And all you need to do to access is just click the little link below, and you'll be taken to a page where you can register today. Thank you so much.